Hey, my name is Austin Eubanks, and for my presentation, I'll be talking about how the amount that parents nurture versus nature their kids and how that affects the way they develop in the motor aspect. And so to start out, I just kind of want to talk about the concept of nurture versus nature. And as we were shown in the McGraw-Hill textbook, it talks about how nature, the people that believe more in nature are called nativists, and what they want, they look at the kind of what you were born with, and like what and how like the way you develop is mostly determined on the genes you were given and all the kind of biology of the body. And then the people that believe more in nurturing, which are called empiricists, believe that your environment, how you were raised, the things that were instilled in you as a kid, all these different things are the majority of what makes, or the majority of how well or how bad an individual develops motorly. And personally, I believe that nurture is definitely a lot more important than nature, because just as we did in one of our assignments when it showed us the video of the girl Atlas who is growing up and her parents are there supporting her, and as she climbs the stairs they are there giving her encouraging words and giving her like little support with their hands, and it helped her work on her zone of proximal development. And no matter how much genetically no matter how genetically gifted that baby could have been, if she didn't have that support and that words of encouragement, she would not have been able to advance and develop motorly as fast as a baby that does not have that person there to help them and push them and keep them in a safe environment. Also is very important to be nurtured, because when you leave it up to nature, and not in the sense of like biology and shit, but when you leave it up to nature to survival of the fittest and you just out there in the world, a lot of babies are going to die, a lot of babies are going to have problems from falling, knocking their head, different things like that, that if you had someone that was there nurturing the baby through the process, it would keep them safe and guarded from those situations. But at the same time, it is important to back off from nurturing as they grow up, I feel. Because just as you're helping them, you don't want them to rely on that support. So, like, even with that same Atlas situation, as she grows up, they're still helping her and they're advancing the devices, but the devices are less stable, they're less controlling, you got to take more risks and help her develop her skills on her own. That's why I believe going less nurture, more nature as they grow up is more important, because in order to cause elasticity and like permanent memory of something, it's important to fail. You cannot, or learn, failing is the best way to learn, and you can't fail if you're always being nurtured. So that's, I feel, is a very important part of growing up as a kid, is failing. And if you keep your kid from failing, that just stagnates their growth and keeps them like keeping your kids sheltered for too long and being too strict can cause more problems than it helps with. To add along with why I believe nurturing is so important when you're young, is that it is important to have a parent or a guardian or someone aware of baseline level things that they should be achieving. Like, let's say, for instance, if the person is not having the object permanence that they should have, maybe they have vision problems or something like that, and catching that early is going to help the baby be able to thrive more in the future, because they can start implementing interventions at a young age, so when they get older, it's not as big as a problem and not as hard to change as it would have been if they had done it when they were younger. And so, yeah. And one of the reasons why I really chose this topic is because I grew up as an athlete and I know what it's like to be the most unathletic white dude on the team and having to work my butt off to gain skill, you know? So when it comes to the sport aspect, it's interesting to view nature versus nurture, and is the predictability of how good an athlete going to be, is it based off of how they're nurtured in that sport, or how they're nurtured as in what their environment is, if they work hard, if they are surrounded with people that are uplifting them and giving them the tools to succeed mentally? Or is it more so nature, where you have to be genetically gifted in order to become great, and genetically gifted in order to have the skill and be able to do something and be good at it, you know? And so the first study that I looked at, or not the first study, but one of the studies that I examined, the title is "Why Nature Prevails Over Nurture in the Making of the Elite Athlete." And basically, it just goes over the same concept of this day and age, sports is starting to get to an elite level and very competitive, and training starts as young as, 6, 7 years old. And so at that point, people are really trying to start figuring out how, oh, okay, well, especially with gene alteration. I didn't get to look up anything on that, but that is really interesting to me, about how people might start altering genes in order to make their kids more likely to succeed in sports, and how that's going to start integrating into sports. And it's just interesting to me, because we look at sports and we disqualify people for using steroids and stuff like that. So what happens when you start having kids that were genetically modified, but it was not their choice, it wasn't their doing, it was their parents' doing. And so that's going to be interesting to see and how that develops. But this study just basically goes over how to make a champion. All right. So do you make a champion through nurture, nature, or both? And so what they do is they basically just went through a whole bunch of different studies and kind of just gave information about different athletes, like marathon runners and swimmers and everything like that, and just showed that a lot of them have the genetic makeup to be a champion. To get there, there's only to a certain level you can get to before you plateau, or you level out, or you just don't have any more to advance, because in swimming maybe your arms are too short and you're just short, and to be short and stubby in the wrong places and swimming takes away from being able to reach as far as you can and get the same biomechanics that that swimmers like Michael Phelps, with really long arms, really long legs and feet, and just big hands and stuff like that, that just puts you, automatically start you at another level. And what they also go on to talk about at the very end, is that their conclusion is that at the end of the day, neither one, like, studies have shown so many different sides to it, but it's inconclusive of which one is more important. They're both just as important as the other one. Nature versus nurture, they work simultaneously, like yin and yang. It's like you can't be great without the nurture, and you can't be great without nature. You have to have maybe not equal, but it's just that you need to find a balance between the both. And honestly, I agree with their conclusion, because being an athlete, being an unathletic white guy starting out, I really had to work my hardest. I really had to be nurtured by some trainers, and like I had to go out and seek nurturing because the nature of my being was not giving me what I needed to be able to succeed like I wanted to. And so, so I got to a certain point where I was the hardest worker in the room, and I did everything I did to do, and I ended up going to play college football as an inside linebacker, and I was only 6'1", 180 pounds. So, or 190, but it's like, to a certain extent though, I did not get the acknowledgement. I did not get the looks and all that stuff that come with nature side, the nature side of things. Like when you're 6'5", 250 pounds, running a 4.40, you really get a lot of looks. But if you're only 6'1", 190 pounds running a 4.40, it's not that big of a deal when you're the same position. So you really get kind of underlooked in that aspect. And also, when you get to the more elite levels, there's only so much you can do when you're only 190 pounds. Like, I would still be able to do what I wanted because I would make up for it and being faster and quicker. But at the same time, when you get to even NFL, I would never ever be play ever. I would never ever be able to play NFL football because there's just something about, I cannot sit here and try to block a man that is 6'7", 260 pounds of pure muscle. Like, he will just throw me because the physics behind it just will not match. And so I do agree with the fact that to a certain extent, nature becomes more important, but there is also need to be a balance between both, because even at the professional level, if you're not nurtured and you weren't taught the right techniques, if you weren't taught how to be able to lead the team under pressure and make decisions very quickly, and also there's some nature in that too, but a lot of that comes from the way you were taught to do things and the way you were trained and the people that you were surrounded with, the environments you were in. And so that's how I feel about that article. And lastly, I looked at a research study that their aim of the study was to make clear the neurological phenotype of developmental motor patterns. And so basically, I just want to start out by talking about what a phenotype is. And it's basically the physical expression of a gene, of a genotype. And so a phenotype takes into account not only the genetics, which is the nature side of things, but it also takes in it also takes in the environment and what how the environment affects a gene and how the gene expresses itself. And so this study is really cool because it really does have to contrast and compare the different effects of nurturing and nature on genes. And so basically in this study, they took 32 healthy, typically developing children, video recorded their spontaneous motor behavior in just a natural setting over a span of the first 3 years of life. And while they were recording, they were observing different general movements, standardized motor tasks, and different motor patterns. And the way they classified the motor patterns in this study was using the traditional neurodevelopment approach by Gestalt's perception and the classical neurological approach by the clinical phenotypic determination of movement disorder features, and then they associated outcomes by the Kramer's V cross table. And so the results that they found were that developmental motor patterns in naturally developing babies showed choreactic-like features, they showed monoclonic-like features, and then they showed dystonic-like features. And along with that, they also showed voluntary movements and atactic-like features. And the whole thing that they came to a conclusion was that part of these uncontrollable movements that you see in developing kids are normal, first off. So, like I was talking about earlier, it's important to have nurturing in order to be able to detect if a child is experiencing any lack in development of motor skills. And so, this is showing that it is normal to have different um, choreactic-like features where they're kind of spastic and uncontrollable, and it's okay at a certain extent. But then as you grow older and you start getting to your year 3, 4, 5, 6s, 7s, you need to start having more voluntary, controlled movements that are less spastic and less uncontrolled and less involuntary. So since this study went on for about 3 years, they were able to look at um, the different environments that they were exposed to and the different genotypes that make up each individual. And so through this study, as they were looking at the neurological phenotype, it gave them insight into development of motor patterns and how it's a balance between the autogenetic and initiating pathological movement features in the creation of phenotypes. It takes both the genetics but also the pathological, the mental, and all that side of things to develop certain phenotypes. And so my personal reaction to the study is basically what has been the whole time, is that nurturing is important alongside with nature. You need to understand the fact that we are made up to be a certain way. Our genes have given us, it's like the whole, if you're spiritual, it's the belief that you are made a certain way to be able to perform certain tasks. And you got to understand that and even toddlers, that they are made with a certain genotype. And yes, as they're growing up, it's important to nurture developing those phenotypes. I mean, to developing those genotypes. And so it's a constant balance and a battle between which one do you use. And it's all individual. It's very personal. You can't just say, oh, this is the certain percentage it'll be for every single person. You need 60% of nurture and 40% nature at this point in time. No, because it's all different, because we're all made with different genes and we're all put in different environments. So there's no concrete, and that's what I've learned with all the research too. There's no concrete thing that says one is better, one is worse, one can help do this, one can help do that. Other than also when we're talking about the sports and the elites, I definitely have to say on that aspect that the nature is very, 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 very important and crucial and essential to, if you want to become an elite. Yes, it also takes just as much nature. I mean, it takes just as much nurture, but you need like, if you nurture someone with less nature, with less gifted things from nature, like their genes and stuff, then they won't be able to get as far. They might be able to do it in high school and be better, but there's only so much that you can develop and only so much that you can keep growing in that aspect. And that at some point you got to accept that my body is just not made to do this. It's not made to be a football player. I was gifted with an amazing voice. So that's what I like. And that's kind of cool thing that, like, I'm kind of realizing while doing this, is that we're all made with certain genes, and with those genes, like, we are already instilled with the gifts and the talents. Talent is something I believe you're born with, and skill is something that's kind of either really hard, like you work really hard, you practice to gain a skill. And so talent, you're born with a talent. You're born with different talents that are just gifted to you through your genes. And it's in you. And if you try to go against it, it's going to be really, 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 really hard to not go with it. But if you just, it's kind of just when you become self-conscious and aware, you start just letting go of other perceptions of people and what they expect you to do and what you expect yourself to be, and allow your body, because it's in your genes, you allow your body to reveal what it is that is what you were made to be. Like, if you never sing and you don't realize that you have genes of your vocal cords and your diaphragm and your breath and the way your body was made to be able to do these things much easier and fluently, and a certain sound, it gives you a certain sound compared to other people. It takes nature to have that, but then also takes nurturing to hone into those things. And without nurturing, if you can't nurture a human being to realize that this world isn't all about, for me at least, for me in my situation, it isn't all about football. If I would have never had nurturing to show me that this life isn't all about football, then I would be constantly struggling to try and be a football player when, yes, I went and played college football, but I had to eat so much food, stuff until, and just do all these things that were very negatively affecting my physical health and mental health and spiritual health. And when I just quit football and I got out of the way and I started meditating and centering my mind, kind of raising my level of consciousness in a way, you become more aware of like, oh wow, I'm an artist. I can sing. I can do these things that bring me even more joy and happiness and peace than football did. And so that's kind of cool that I mean, we go from talking about nature versus nurture and motor development to how it also can translate, even in the motor development sense, to how finding peace in this world and peace in this life comes from learning how to balance nature versus nurture. And that's basically what kind of this all boils down to, is giving a human being the best life it can, you know? That's why we do this, is to figure out, okay, nature versus nurture, which one's going to set this person up to succeed the most, and what things don't, you know? So that's kind of cool that it comes down to that. And thank you for giving this assignment. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say on these topics. I know that I'm on a computer screen. It's kind of hard to talk about this when I'm not talking to someone in person, but I hope that you were able to at least kind of understand what message came across. Because the message that came out at the end was something that I feel is just not just for exercise science students or for psychology majors or whatever, but it's for everybody to learn. And it's cool that it came through this assignment that I was able to learn that just like now as I was talking to you. So thank you. Have a good day. And it's time for spring break, baby!